The victory over the MAGA movement was not complete until its leaders faced justice. As with the architects of Nazi Germany, their punishment would serve not merely to avenge the past, but to instruct the future. Each figure, once celebrated, feared, or idolized, now stood alone before the judgment of history. Arrested after years of court delays and final Supreme Court rulings stripping him of immunity, Donald Trump faced more than 50 charges, ranging from conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of justice, inciting insurrection, and crimes against humanity linked to migrant family separations. Held at a secure military tribunal in Philadelphia and the birthplace of the Constitution, Trump's trial was televised globally. He ranted. He refused to recognize the court. He called it a witch hunt to the very end. When the guilty verdict came, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in a special isolated unit at Fort Jefferson, a 19th century fort turned high-security island prison off the Florida Keys, symbolic as it lay just miles from the shores where so many immigrants had once sought the American dream. In his lonely cell, he was given daily reading material, the U.S. Constitution. Once hailed as a genius innovator, Musk's downfall was spectacular. He faced charges for using his platform's Twitter X to spread disinformation and incite violence, violations of antitrust laws, and funding insurgent groups through shell companies. In court, Musk attempted to defend himself with bravado, memes, and mockery. But the evidence of his deliberate sabotage of democratic processes was overwhelming. He was stripped of citizenship rights and assets. SpaceX and Tesla were nationalized under emergency authority. Musk was sentenced to 20 years of labor, leading not space missions but infrastructure rebuilding projects across rural America, working under conditions he once mocked. In history books, Musk became known as the fallen technocrat. Green, who had continued to spread conspiracies even after the MAGA collapse, was convicted of sedition and domestic terrorism encouragement. Unrepentant, she refused to participate in any reconciliation hearings. She was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, barred from ever holding office or appearing on public broadcast platforms. Green would spend her years writing angry memoirs that few read, a forgotten relic of a poisoned era. Carlson, the infamous broadcaster who had fueled the culture of rage nightly, faced civil and criminal liability for promoting falsehoods that led directly to acts of violence and insurrection. Unlike Trump, Carlson eventually broke. In a tearful courtroom confession, he admitted, knowing he was lying, knowing the lies endangered lives, and doing it anyway for ratings and power. In exchange for full cooperation and turning over internal Fox documents, he avoided prison, but was sentenced to lifetime public service, teaching media literacy to high school students. His first lecture, televised nationally, began with the words, "I was the lie you believed." Steve Bannon was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy against the US, his final words mocking the court before being removed forcibly. Rudy Giuliani, broken and senile, was confined to a supervised elder care facility where he lived out his days, a cautionary tale played nightly in civic education videos. Ron DeSantis, indicted for human rights violations tied to migrant trafficking, fled to exile in a non-extradition country and became a hunted international fugitive, a political pariah even among conservatives. Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, and other lesser MAGA functionaries faced varying sentences, mostly long bans from public life and mandatory civic re-education. In the Grand Hall of the American Democracy Museum in Washington, D.C., the final exhibit is called When Lies Led Men to Ruin. A wall of names, Trump, Musk, Green, Bannon, Carlson, and more, etched into dark stone, stands in silence. Above it, carved into marble, the final words of the Demagafication hearings, "Freedom cannot survive without truth."
America 2026. Remember that? It wasn't pretty. We were more divided than a pizza at a Weight Watchers meeting. The political climate? About as welcoming as a scorpion nest in your slippers. The MAGA movement, once a fringe group of angry Facebook uncles, had become a full-blown fever dream. They'd burrowed deep into the fabric of America, leaving a trail of misinformation and resentment in their wake. Social media had become a dumpster fire of conspiracy theories. Remember QAnon? It went from whispers in the dark corners of the internet to primetime dinner table conversation. People believed anything and everything as long as it confirmed their biases. Facts? Who needs those when you have alternative facts? The political divide had become a chasm, swallowing up any hope of civil discourse. Compromise became a dirty word. Bipartisanship? Forget about it. You were either with them or against them, and God help you if you were caught in the middle. It all came to a head in the tumultuous election of 2026. Accusations of voter fraud, fueled by the MAGA machine, ran rampant. The fabric of democracy, already strained to its breaking point, finally ripped. The aftermath of the 2026 election was like waking up from a bender to find your house on fire. The legal battles dragged on for months, each court case adding another log to the inferno of discontent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hammer of justice fell. The figureheads of the MAGA movement, the architects of this chaos, were held accountable. Trump, Musk, and a rogues gallery of their cronies found themselves facing charges for their roles in undermining American democracy. The trials were broadcast nationwide, a public reckoning for the ages. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of tweets, speeches, and backroom deals that laid bare their contempt for the very principles they swore to uphold. The verdict sent shockwaves through the nation. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Justice had been served, but the road to healing was only just beginning. America had been pushed to the brink, and it was clear that simply locking up the ringleaders wouldn't be enough. The disease of disinformation, of division, ran too deep. The year is 2027. America, battered but not broken, embarked on a path of healing. The Demagafication program, a bold and ambitious undertaking, was born. The goal was simple yet monumental: to dismantle the structures of extremism and rebuild trust in democratic institutions. It was a nationwide intervention, a commitment to truth and reconciliation. Drawing inspiration from the denazification efforts in post-World War II Germany, the program aimed to address the root causes of extremism. It wasn't just about punishing the guilty, but about re-educating the misled, about rebuilding a shared sense of reality. This wasn't about erasing history, no matter how ugly. It was about learning from it, about understanding how a nation founded on the ideals of liberty and justice could find itself flirting with authoritarianism. Section 4. Echoes of Nuremberg, the Democracy Restoration Trials. The Democracy Restoration Trials were a key component of the Demagafication program. These weren't your typical courtroom dramas. Sure, there were judges and juries, but the focus was less on punishment and more on accountability and education. Thousands of individuals, from social media influencers to local politicians, who had actively spread disinformation and incited violence, were called to account for their actions. However, these trials weren't just about pointing fingers. They served as public forums, where the insidious nature of propaganda was exposed, where the line between free speech and harmful rhetoric was examined. Witnesses, many of whom had been swept up in the MAGA movement, shared their stories, their regrets, their hopes for a better future. The trials became a form of national therapy, a way for America to confront its demons and begin the painful process of healing. Section 5. Truth and Reconciliation. A nation confronts its demons. The American Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established in 2028, was more than just a government body. It was a symbol of the nation's commitment to confronting its past and building a better future. Modeled after similar commissions in South Africa and Rwanda, the ATRC provided a platform for victims of MAGA-era violence and discrimination to share their stories. It was a raw, emotional process, but a necessary one. The commission also held public hearings where perpetrators, from online trolls to elected officials, could confess their wrongdoing, express remorse, and seek forgiveness. It was a chance for individuals to take responsibility for their actions and contribute to the healing process. The ATRC was never about revenge. It was about understanding, about acknowledging the pain that had been inflicted, and about ensuring that such darkness would never again engulf the nation. Section 6. Rebuilding from the ground up. The National Civic Literacy Program. Recognizing that a healthy democracy requires informed and engaged citizens, the Demagafication program launched the National Civic Literacy Program in 2029. This ambitious initiative aimed to combat the misinformation and lack of critical thinking skills that had fueled the rise of extremism. It was about empowering citizens to be active participants in their own governance. The program introduced comprehensive civics education in schools, from elementary to college level. It emphasized critical thinking, media literacy, and the importance of fact-checking and evidence-based reasoning. The National Civic Literacy Program wasn't just about memorizing facts about the Constitution. It was about fostering a love of learning, a respect for diverse viewpoints, and a commitment to civil discourse. America had been through a storm. The MAGA years had left their mark, divisions ran deep, trust was shattered. But even in the darkest hour, hope flickered. The demagogues fell, their grip on power loosened. Americans, exhausted but resolute, began the long journey of healing and rebuilding. This was a second reconstruction, a chance to reaffirm the nation's core values. The task was immense, the path ahead uncertain. But America had faced down darkness before. And from the ashes, a new dawn was breaking. This was not a time for revenge but for renewal. The nation craved unity, a shared purpose. From the ruins of division, a new spirit emerged. It was a spirit of resilience, of determination, of hope. Americans rolled up their sleeves, ready to rebuild their nation. The second reconstruction had begun, and with it, the promise of a brighter future. At the heart of the Second Reconstruction lay a landmark piece of legislation, the Freedom Restoration Act. This act, passed by a coalition government, aimed to address the root causes of the MAGA era's turmoil. It was a bold plan, encompassing 5 key pillars. First, the act addressed the crumbling foundations of American society. A Marshall Plan-style investment poured resources into neglected communities. Schools were rebuilt, hospitals were modernized, libraries reopened their doors, broadband internet connected rural areas, public transportation systems were revitalized. This was about more than bricks and mortar. It was about investing in people, in opportunity, in a shared future. Second, the Freedom Restoration Act tackled the issue of voting rights head-on. Automatic voter registration at the age of 18 became the law of the land. Universal mail-in voting ensured accessibility for all. Election Day was declared a national holiday, allowing every citizen the time to cast their vote. These measures aim to make voting easier and more accessible, strengthening the very foundation of American democracy. The Second Reconstruction was about more than laws and institutions. It was about a cultural shift, a reawakening of America's democratic spirit. Across the country, a wave of initiatives sought to heal the wounds of division and rebuild a sense of shared purpose. One of the most visible manifestations of this cultural renewal was the rise of democracy festivals. Held annually in towns and cities across the nation, these festivals were a celebration of free speech, civic duty, and community engagement. They were a joyous affirmation of democratic values, a testament to the enduring power of unity. Alongside these celebrations, a more introspective movement emerged: local truth circles. These facilitated dialogues provided a safe space for Americans to share their experiences, acknowledge their differences, and find common ground. They were about listening, healing, and bridging the divides that had driven the nation apart. The Second Reconstruction gave rise to a new generation of Americans, shaped by the turmoil of the MAGA era and the hope of the rebuilding years. This was the Constitution generation. They had witnessed firsthand the fragility of democracy and the importance of safeguarding its principles. Growing up in a time of renewed civic engagement, the Constitution generation embraced their role as guardians of democracy. They were less cynical, more politically active, and deeply committed to protecting the rights and freedoms that had been under threat. Their voices were heard in town halls, on social media, and in the halls of power. The Constitution generation understood that democracy was not a spectator sport. It demanded active participation, vigilance, and a willingness to stand up for what was right. They were a generation defined by their commitment to truth, justice, and the enduring promise of a more perfect union. Their legacy would be to ensure that the darkness of the MAGA era never descended upon America again. They were the hope for a brighter future, a future where the flame of liberty burned brightly, passed down from generation to generation.